Ladies and gentlemen, today I have the pleasure to welcome Miss Hilary Marzec. Miss Hilary Marzec is the owner and tour guide at Inside Chicago Walking Tour. Miss Hilary, thank you very much for joining me under the Human Rights Tree.
Of course, thank you for having me. I'm happy to chat with you.
I truly believe that one of the best way to learn is through traveling. And whenever I visit a city, my desire is to join a walking tour so I can learn more about the city, walk through the street, and learn about the history of the city. And I was going through looking about walking tours in Chicago, and I saw your walking tour inside Chicago walking tour. So this is what triggered me to basically invite you under the Human Rights Tree and talk about your organization. But before we go into your organization, I would love to know a little bit about your background. Who is Miss Hilary?
Sure. Well, wow, that's a big question. Who am I? In a philosophical way. So I have, I guess just my educational background is I grew up Catholic, went to private school, and then for university, I went to the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, and I got a bachelor's degree in French with a minor in linguistics. And I got a master's degree in a field called comparative literature and critical theory. So it's not what you would expect of someone who founds a walking tour business to teach about architecture and history. But it very much did form the way that I teach about things. And I think that I teach about things in a very engaging way because of my educational background. I make connections among things rather than giving a laundry list of facts and numbers and dates and names, which a lot of tours tend to be. I try to get people to see connections among things.
Donc, vous parlez français.
Oui, je parle français très bien. Et vous
Okay,
aussi.
je parle un peu. So are you from Chicago or you are from the suburb?
I'm from about an hour south, a city called Joliet, which if you're from Joliet, you got to say it's not a suburb. It grew up at the same time as Chicago, and then suburbs kind of filled in between.
So can you tell us a little bit about growing up in Juliet?
Sure. So Joliet, it's a pretty blue collar town. It's a relatively large city. It definitely has a large Catholic population, and I come from the two sides of my family, Irish Catholic and Polish Catholic, and so that's pretty deeply ingrained in our family. Joliet itself is it's known for prisons because Stateville, a big federal prison, is just outside of Joliet. And it's also known for, I would say, football and steel, big steel factory out that way.
So if somebody see the need of locating Juliet geographically, can you guide that on that trip?
Sure. So Joliet, where I'm from, is where the Mother Road and the Father Road join up, and there's actually a bunch of things down there that you can see marking that sort of historical marker in our country. Joliet has the historic Route 66 going right through it. It is nowadays you would be able to get there very easily from Chicago by taking 55 south. And 55 and then Interstate 80 actually cross there. And so you get a lot of trucks coming through there on Interstate 80. A lot of people who are making maybe like a cross-country Route 66 trip will somehow come through Joliet. So it really is a crossroads kind of city.
Usually, when people talk about suburb or small towns in America, there is a view that translate through that. and often is basically big houses and beautiful cars. So where the urge of walking came into your life? Because
Um,
often there is not like the view of walking path
yeah, definitely.
in the suburbs and small towns in America.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that the United States, we definitely do prioritize cars. Cars even overtook trains with at least personal transportation. I would say that when I was living in Joliet, when I was growing up, most of what I would do is by car. And that's pretty typical, you know, going to school, going to work. Americans really don't get out and just walk around that much if they live in a suburb. And I don't want to say that as a blanket generalization, but it is definitely a true thing. We do like our cars in the United States. I think that my desire to get out and walk is, well, partly just from going to school in a campus that has beautiful grounds to walk around, the University of Illinois. I also lived in Paris for a couple of years, and that's a very walkable city. I also lived in Austria for a couple of years in Salzburg, and that's a very walkable city. So I think that I just kind of got used to that being a hobby of mine. And then coming back and living in Chicago, starting in 2010, I realized that Chicago is not only a very walkable city, but it's also fascinating to see things up close. And that's something that you can't do if you're just driving by.
Oh, okay. So basically, if I have understanding, your love for walking from your school in Paris and Geneva was it Geneva or in Austria?
Salzburg in Austria.
Oh, okay. How was it walking in campus and walking American walking in Paris? How
Well,
was the walking process
you mean in Paris or in Salzburg or just generally?
in general?
So I think that, you know, as a student, when you're an American student, oftentimes we don't have cars to get around. And I think that American university campuses are oftentimes set up in a way that they can be walkable. So you walk from class to class, you walk from class to work, you walk from your home to your activities. They are relatively walkable, although the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign is a massive campus. But then living in Paris, obviously I don't have a car there either. And so even though I would take the metro places, it was also kind of a matter of being curious about what I would see along the way. And so once I kind of saw it's a relatively compact city with a lot of fun little streets stretching out from from the boulevards. It just, I don't know, it just kind of became something that I just naturally fell into doing as a preference because I really didn't have any, and I wouldn't want to drive a car around Paris, actually, come to think of it. I've been in cars in Paris, and it's,
Mm,
especially when you get to those roundabouts, it gets pretty scary.
I see. But can you take us a little bit on the roots of your idea? Because obviously, through walking in cities like Paris, walking in campuses, you come, you became a walker and feel love with walking. And after that, you decided you want to translate that idea into into a business. So can you take us to that process, the roots of being in love with walking into making it a concrete idea in which you want to make a living in?
Sure, absolutely. I would say that the walking was secondary. I think that the primary impetus for me starting my business, my walking tour business, was to show people the a side of Chicago that they didn't know about. To show people not only the way buildings can look from up close, because usually think about it, if you're going downtown And especially if you're an American who likes their cars, you're going to get stuck in traffic, you get frustrated, you're not looking out your window to see the details of a building, right? You got to pay attention to the road. And then you think of visitors who come here. You know, Chicago is the third largest city in the country. This is a city that people from all around the world come to visit. And so they're not going to have cars, generally speaking. And so they are going to be out walking around. They don't know which buildings they can go inside and which buildings would even be worthwhile to see on the inside. And so for me personally, I started walking around downtown just out of my own curiosity when I started working in river tourism, because I got my start as a river tour guide doing boat tours. And so boat tours are wonderful because you get this wonderful overview of the city from the perspective of the river, but it really sparked this curiosity in me about what's on the inside of those buildings. And so once I got to see all that, it just made me super curious and really inspired to want to show other people. Like I'll have locals on my tours all the time who will say, you know, I'll have a group of 20 people in front of me in front of a building downtown. And I'll say, you know, who here has been inside this building? And nobody raises a hand. They walk by it all the time. They might go to the Potbelly sandwich shop that's in it, but they don't actually go into the building and see the lobby, which is one of the best parts. So it was more that, and then the walking was sort of secondary.
I see. But often people may be in love with walking um, and have the idea of learning in their own. But when you come to your case, you did not want to just walk and learn. There was a desire of sharing what you learned from your walking experience. So can you take us in the specific dates, you know, when that idea of emerged into your mind and the desire of building a business? Can you take us to specifics, dates,
It's
and
it's hard to say, but I would say my first thought is that when I was working for a big boat tour company in town, I worked for them as a river tour guide for a few years, and then and then they bumped me up to management. So I was the head of product development for them for a couple of years.
okay.
And they had a water taxi system in place, if you've ever taken a water taxi in
Yeah,
Chicago.
I did. Mm.
And it got me to thinking, you know, a boat tour, it just has one route. They're not stopping to drop anybody off. Whereas the water taxis, they have a few stops. And so I suggested to these people, what if we use your water taxi system and the stops that are already in place and combine it with a little bit of walking so that we get the best of both worlds? So we do a little bit on the river. The guests learn about the river architecture, but then we actually get out and those guests get to go on foot with their guide to see more of that stuff up close so that we're getting both sides of the equation. So
I
that
see.
was really where it started. And then once I was actually out on foot doing this, there was just so much to show on foot that I said, no, I've got to make these walking tours.
I see. Um, the idea was born.
Yes.
When was it? And you decided to call it Inside Chicago Walking Tour. Why is the name?
So I don't know when, I know when I made my website and when I made my logo. It was the day that I left my old job. I came home, I want to say it was maybe September 2013. I came home, I looked up on maybe GoDaddy to see if the website name was taken. And so I pulled up Photoshop, made myself a logo with my meager Photoshop skills. And even my logo has a little door on the Sears Tower, and then there's like a light that goes from inside the door that makes the letters that are in front of it have a shadow in front of them. And so there's that sense of like, ooh, going inside that building. So that was the inspiration. I wanted to get people inside these buildings. I would say that when I started it, like the kind of genesis of that whole idea was probably bit by bit in especially that last year, like 2012 to 2013, of realizing there's so much there that we don't see unless we go out on foot.
I see. Why the name? Inside Walking Chicago Walking Tour. Why the name?
A couple of reasons. Inside Chicago walking tours, number one, the word inside communicates that idea. It actually has kind of a double meaning. It's both inside, as in we are literally going inside of buildings, and we focus on architectural interiors, which is something that no other company had done. Other companies had popped into buildings here and there, but that wasn't the theme of what they were doing. I wanted the theme of my tours to be, we are going to be going inside these buildings to give you a side of Chicago that you're probably not going to see on your own, right? So that was the second meaning of inside, is almost like the idea of an insider's scoop. You're going to see an inside angle on what millions of people are going to miss.
I see. Going through creating organization, I'm guessing like many of us, in your first time, you didn't know what is inside in many buildings in Chicago, and you have to learn. How was the process of learning um, to know a building, basically? Because for instance, I have been living in Chicago for 23 years right now. But if you, if you, I can say this is the name of this building, but when you come knowing really the building from the inside is going to be a myth in my case. But when it come to you, can you take us to that um, learning process? Who do you have to talk to, and how did you get inside the buildings and was able to learn more about them?
So I would say the first step was simply me walking around having curiosity.
Okay.
I can remember back in probably 2012, um, walking down LaSalle Street and literally just looking in windows and seeing, oh, that looks kind of neat. I'm going to pop in there, speak with the security guard. Usually I would get in contact with a building manager or a security manager for a building, see if they allow people from the public to come in and see if there were any kind of rules they have about you need to stay over here. It needs to be fewer than this many people. We're closed on the weekends. Some buildings, I provide them with their certificate of insurance from my company. So it's been a big kind of like administrative, and it's an ongoing administrative process because the research itself is also ongoing. You know, I don't know everything about the city, absolutely not. And so the more I learn, the more I mean, I have tons of tours that I've made. They're completely fleshed out, and I just don't offer them yet, or maybe I'll never offer them. But just I'm an academic at heart, you know, and so for me, these are like kind of almost like full academic projects, you know, where I want to tell some kind of story through, is usually a 2-hour story, through an on-foot experience of Chicago, and then the theme can be whatever is in that area. So for example, I'm right now going to be doing a virtual tour, helping out with a virtual tour series down in Bronzeville. And we teach about Ida B. Wells, and we teach about the Victory Monument, and we teach about the 8th Regiment Armory down there. And it's very cool, you know, so it's an ongoing thing.
So basically talking to you, I see you in different level, and I'm sharing those different step. You were working as a tour guide, and you decided to leave your work and start your own business. And that business happened to be doing tours through walking, and you overcome fears you may have and decided you're going to get your own organization called Inside Chicago Walking Tours. And you went through that process of learning to know really what is inside many buildings, and learning also the rules and regulations on how to get into them and be able to show people. And after that, I guess you decide to jump in and say, I'm going to do my first tour. When was your first tour?
My first tour is still my most popular tour.
Okay.
And I call it The World Within, Dazzling Interiors of the Loop.
Okay.
And that really communicates that idea of there's a world within these buildings that we just walk by all the time. So I've edited that route only a little bit over the years.
Okay.
For example, COVID affected, all of us, but you can imagine it especially affected companies in tourism and especially small businesses in tourism.
Yeah.
So there is a building that we used to show on that route that decided to close to the public after COVID. I think they're reopening now. But I had ended up finding another building that I wanted to show more anyway. And so the longest running tour, my first tour, is the longest running tour, and it's still the most popular.
So when was it?
2014. I want to say March 2014 is when I officially launched my business. I had my website that I had created. I, had my business license and everything was all set to go. And in that first year, I didn't make a ton of money, and a lot of those tours had 0 people on them, and so I would cancel them. But it was a matter of building it up. And the first few years, I would go around with just bags of brochures and rat cards visiting all the hotels. And my dad helped me even. My dad and I, we each have bags of brochures and then go and just introduce ourselves to people who might be able to recommend my company.
So can you take us to a day in which you have few people and you start going through the process, a day, a time, and what happened?
You mean at that time
Yeah,
when I was first starting?
yeah. Because
Sure.
I feel like there is starting date,
Yeah.
in any project, and often we remember that date. We started. This is the first day I'm going to put my idea into reality, and you schedule a day, contacted people, and have people around and start. Can you take us to that day?
So I think my very first one, if I remember correctly, I think I offered, a few for free at first, just to
Okay.
get people on the tours, to give myself practice, to kind of figure out any kinks that needed to be ironed out. So for example, I had a couple friends of friends come on the tour. I had a cousin of mine, 2 cousins of mine join the tour, and they were local. And so it was this kind of hodgepodge of people who were willing to take the tour, let me know what they thought could be changed. But everybody had a wonderful time, and they ended up leaving reviews, and it worked out really well.
I see. So, where the tour started and where the tour ended during that day?
That day, I believe that tour started over by the Sears Tower, which is now
Okay.
called the Willis Tower. And it ended over by Millennium Park.
Okay. Sears Tower. Can you take us inside and share a few secret about that building?
Oh, sure. So the Sears Tower, if you don't mind, I'll just still call it the Sears Tower. It's just easier. But
Okay.
it was officially renamed the Willis Tower in 2009. But because it
Okay.
got famous as the Sears Tower, tallest building in the world for the first 30 years that it was around, from 1973 until 2003. Um, I think the most interesting, well, a few interesting things about it. So it's called a bundled tube construction. It was a Bangladeshi American engineer named Fazler Khan who came up with this idea.
Okay.
And you can imagine, like, take a pencil and
Mm.
put 9 of them together and then kind of poke a couple of the pencils down like that, so that
Mm.
some of them are higher, some of them are lower. It gives the whole thing strength to bend. And
Okay.
so he came up with that idea, the bundled tube. So if you saw it from the sky, it's 9 boxes and it would look kind of like a Rubik's Cube from the sky, right?
Okay.
But I think the neatest thing about it more recently is that during COVID, shortly before COVID, and then during COVID, when people were not in the buildings, they actually completed this massive addition that they put on at the bottom, this several stories high kind of multi-use, but largely commercial space with like restaurants, and they kind of did up the lobbies a little bit nicer. But they called that catalog, and that's a reference to the Sears catalog, which I think is kind of fun.
I see. So when you go inside, what did you tell people when you bring them inside?
Inside,
Yeah.
um, it depends. It depends on what the theme of the tour is, because we actually, though I have brought people in the Sears Tower many times, that's
Mm.
actually not the building that was on the route. We started the route near the Sears Tower. We
Okay.
started the route actually across the street from the Sears Tower, specifically because I wanted to make the point. You all know this building right here, don't you? Tallest building in Chicago. We're all looking at it right now. Did anyone think to look across the street at this one?
Okay.
Probably not, because we miss the things that are next to the famous things. So for my first tour, I wanted to make sure that my first building was the building that was across the street from the Sears Tower, to make that point. And it's actually a beautiful building. It's known as 311 South Wacker Drive.
Mm. Usually in your tour, walking tour, how many miles do you walk? Or it depend on the population you have?
Yeah, it depends on if it's a public tour versus a private tour and how far the people want to go, how long we're touring. But generally speaking, the public tours that we offer are 2 hours long and usually about a mile and a half to mile and three quarters.
Do you have a breaks? Mm.
Not really. We
Okay.
recommend that people use the bathroom before. We let them know if they need to use the bathroom for an emergency over the course of the tour, they can do that. But 2 hours is usually pretty manageable for most adults.
Okay. Can you take us to those 3 hours? I know you offer different programs, but like a typical program, which building do you go to and what kind of information do you provide and what kind of question do you receive from your audience?
Sure. So, well, let's see. I'll walk you through a little bit of the World Within tour, the most popular one.
Okay.
So, that one we start about a block south of the Chicago Board of Trade. So we start in a plaza where we are able to look at the skyline and compare architectural styles. Because like I said, we teach about these things in a contextual way. So instead of saying, hey, that's modernism, that's Art Deco, that's Beaux-Arts, this is this is that, we say, think of a building like a cake. And if you think of a building like a cake, we used to put a lot of frosting on the outside. And so if you see a lot of detail on the outside of a building, that's probably one of our older buildings, a neoclassical one, a classical revival, a Beaux-Arts style, and we'll point that out. And then we say, start to strip away the frosting. Eventually you're going to get to just the cake, and that's modernism. That's the Sears Tower, that's the Federal Building, that's the Daily Center, right? Those boxy office buildings, which is great having just the cake for like 40 years, but understandably it gets really boring. So then after modernism, you have the style that means after modernism, postmodernism. And postmodernism, if you think of it in the cake analogy, it's trying to bring frosting back onto the cake. It's trying to have fun with architecture again. And the way they usually do that is by making these little references to things around them. So like buildings that are on the main branch of the Chicago River might have green windows to sort of pay homage to the fact that they're at the point of the river where the water is still nice and green and clean, right? So we give people this overview, kind of equip them with this mental tool belt so that throughout the course of the tour, they can then be making connections and be like, oh, right, because this one has a lot of detail. Oh, this is why this looks that way, right? So then we go over about a little over 100 years worth of architectural styles. We usually visit 5, sometimes 6 if we have a little bit of extra time. Really beautiful interiors downtown. We go from Art Deco to Richardsonian Romanesque to postmodern to Chicago school style. We end with the Chicago Cultural Center, which has the world's largest Tiffany stained glass dome inside that most Chicagoans have never even seen. So it's a really special tour, and I think it helps people to be able to understand why things look the way they look even after the tour. Because I'm not a fan of tours that just fill you with a bunch of information and then at the end of it you're like, okay, great. now what do I do with this information? These tours actually teach you how to see. It's not just teaching you what to see, it's teaching you how to see. And I think that in that way, they're very valuable for people who want to go walking around whatever city they're walking around.
I see. Often, as I indicated, when I visit cities, I like to go through walking tours. And the reason um, of that, because I feel I see walking tours as something that will allow me to learn. So I see it as education for me. But more than that, I see it as a path to health, health wise, because when you walk, you're exercising, you're burning calories. And therefore, I view um, tour walkers like the guides as a historian, as a health health trainer, but in some time, somebody who want to safeguard your security. How do you handle um, all those pictures that reflect your own person? Because in many ways, people expect you to tell little story about Chicago. For instance, I'm coming to you. Can you tell me a story of Chicago many people don't know?
Yeah. I think so it seems what you're asking me is like how do I balance all these hats that I
Yes,
wear?
yes.
Yeah.
Mm.
So it's a good question, and honestly, I think a lot of people would sort of dismiss what I do and what other tour guides do as easy work. You're crowd control. You're just walking people through a city, pointing at things, telling them things they could learn on Wikipedia. That is absolutely not the case. It's exactly what you just said. Especially for me in my position, being the business owner, but just let's say one of my tour guides, they have to be able to engage everyone. So they have to be some kind of entertainer. They have to be an audience reader because they have to be able to be attuned to the attention span, the comfort and the safety of every last person in the group, right? They also have to be attuned to the considerateness, the consideration that we are giving other people, right? I can't stand it when I walk down the sidewalk and a big group of people just walks at me and don't even think to move over. It's like, no, you move to the right, I move to the right, we're both in this world, right? Or if I walk into a building and there's some person with a massive group there and they're just blocking the door and like, I think that's very rude. And so I train my guides, we're part of this world. You don't want to be intrusive. You don't want to be an obstacle to other people. You're not the only people out here. So I think we have to be aware of our surroundings. We have to be aware of potential threats. If there's some person on the street who is not doing well and is seeming to be perhaps a harm to himself or to the people walking by him, we have to be aware of that. We have to be aware of weather conditions. We have to know on a quick thought where we can go in case of emergency, both weather emergency, medical emergency, right? We had somebody, not on one of my tours, but on a fellow tour guide told me about a boat tour that he had recently where there was a woman who was fainting because of heat exhaustion, and it wasn't even in the 80s yet. So these are things that like you have to be ready for, and then also being able to field questions, and I if I don't know the answer to a question, I don't do what I think a lot of tour guides and teachers do, which is I'm going to make up something, right? No, I'll admit I'm not God. I don't know everything. If I don't know the answer to a question, I'll say that's a really, really good question. I never thought of that. I'm going to have to look that one up.
Yeah,
So
you can also always tell people where to go and get the answer. So,
absolutely.
how diverse the population you handle often based on your experience? How diverse are they? All American, or there are people who come from different parts of the world?
There's really people from all over the place. Uh,
Okay.
we, Chicago has a very competitive tourism industry. And
Okay.
so there's tours for all people, there's tours for all budgets. What I do find is that usually the people who take the free tours, which free tours are never free tours, the guides will always ask you to tip them at the end, and that's how they get paid. Um,
Okay.
so I find that people who take the free tours are not the people who can't afford a tour. It's the people who want to get free stuff.
Okay.
And so I'm a strong believer that people should get paid for their labor.
Mhm.
There's a lot of volunteer tour guides in Chicago who never get paid for their labor, and the people who are paying the ticket prices to be on their tours don't know that, and they're shocked to find that out. So I'm a big believer in paying people for their labor, and I'm a big believer in yeah, I mean, I guess just that. I think people should be paid for their skill set. People should be paid for their time. And so in terms of the kind of audience that we get, I think it is people, whether they are American or from around the world, who are who see the value in that and who want to pay us for our skill set and for our labor.
I see. Um, usually, usually, as you indicated, you have people coming for all around the world. So your tour is based only in English, or do you uh, provide a tour in different languages?
So the public tours that we offer are only offered in English, and
Okay.
that's because we do have people from all around the world, and English is always the most commonly spoken language.
Okay.
Usually, if there are people on my tours who don't speak English, they will let me know at the top of the tour, and they might have like a person there helping them to translate to them. But generally speaking, English seems to be the most commonly spoken language. So that's what our public tours are offered in. But then I personally do private tours in French.
Okay.
And then I have a couple of guides who do private tours in German and Spanish.
Based on your experience, why you think people visit Chicago?
Well, it depends. It
Okay.
depends on the audience. So the people who take my tours, they visit Chicago to learn about the history and the architecture and the culture of the city. I would say they want to see the skyscrapers. They want to hear the blues music. They want to experience a big American city. There are other people who visit Chicago who just want to learn about Al Capone and hot dogs and, the Cubs. And those are not people who take my tours because we don't really offer that kind of subject matter. We do teach about gangsters. I take that back. We do teach about gangsters if it is pertinent to something else that we're teaching about. So I
Okay.
have a tour, for example, it's called Haunted by Our Dark Side. And that is a tour that covers kind of all what's called dark tourism aspects of the city. So disasters and murderers and gangsters and ghosts. But again, it all has some kind of reason that we're talking about it. It's not just because, ooh, this talk about gangsters is very titillating, so I'm going to make a whole tour out of this. It's not like that.
Okay. As you live in Chicago and you know that Chicago is a city of many seasons.
Mhm.
Your tour, how do you frame your tour based on seasons?
I think that walking tours are actually the best tour to do in any weather because when it's hot outside, if it's too hot, you can get inside to where it's cooler. When it's too cold, you can get inside to where it's warmer. If it's raining, you can go inside. If it's too windy, you can go inside. And so really in inclement weather, whether it's too cold or too hot, walking tours are the best option. They really are. And it's funny when you think of what kind of tour should I do in the summer in Chicago? A lot of people think a boat tour, right? But I know from working in boat tourism since 2008, I've been working in boat tourism because I still do boat tours for another company. I've been working in boat tourism since 2008. That's the hottest place to be in the summer. because we're not going in the water. You're all sitting up on top of a boat with the sun full on you, right? And so walking tours really are the best kind of tour to do in every season. Plus, one of the best things is that, especially in Chicago, we're a very green city. You know, we have 600 official park district parks, and it very much is a city of seasons. So in the spring, you get all the tulips and you get all the beautiful flowers coming out. In the fall, you get the fall colors, right? So there is a lot of beauty because of the seasons that you can really only experience on foot.
I see. But the distance, is it always the same? Or you may reduce the distance based on seasons?
No, it's generally the same because
Okay.
the most popular, the our our kind of regularly offered public tours spend a lot of time indoors anyway. And so the seasons really don't affect it that much.
Okay. In your learning process about the history of the city, did you have the chance to talk to a historian or a person who is well knowledge? And would you mind share the name of the person and what do you learn from that person, history wise?
Yeah, I mean, there have been so many people that I've talked with over the years. There's been so much research of my own that I've done going to the source of, going to the Chicago History Museum archives or going to the Newberry archives or going to the Library of Congress archives.
Okay.
Like there are a lot of resources that I have gone to on my own. But then in terms of actually getting to speak with people, fellow tour guide historians,
Mhm.
people like Jeffrey Bears and Tim Samuelson. Like there are people who are fellow historians and
Okay.
we share ideas. But I would say actually the most memorable people that I've talked with have been architects, architects that I've contacted to ask them, is this what you intended with this building? For example, like a postmodern building makes a
Mm.
lot of those secret references. And so you can guess about what the reference is being made, or you can ask the source. So I contacted this one architectural firm a few years ago about a particular building that I thought, okay, I think it's making these references, but I just want to double check before I teach about it. And so I contacted the architectural firm. They wrote me an email back and they said, this architect, this is his phone number. He wants you to give him a call so he can tell you about it. So, and he was this famous architect, Lucien Lagrange. So I called him and we had a 45-minute conversation about his career, and it was fascinating. So that's probably
Can
my
you,
most memorable one.
can you tell us about Lucien Lagrange, which building he built
Sure.
in
So
Chicago?
there's a few buildings downtown that he did. But this particular one that I had called to ask about is actually where we meet for the World Within tour. It's the very beginning of our tour. It's located at 425 South Financial Place.
Okay.
If you're going out Ida B. Wells Drive, if you're going from the city out to the suburbs, you're getting out on Highway 290.
Okay.
When you're on Ida B. Wells downtown, there's this kind of light brownish orange colored building that stretches over Ida B. Wells Drive, and it has these arches to it, right?
Yes.
That's the one. And I had contacted them asking them, am I interpreting this correctly? Are those arches meant to be a reference to Louis Sullivan's Stock Exchange building? And is the bay window structure that you have in your building, is it meant to be referencing early Chicago skyscrapers that had the bay windows so commonly? And he said, yes, absolutely. I was making those references. And he said that that building, which he did, I believe it was in the late 1980s, he said that that was probably his most important building in Chicago to him because it marked his own transition as an architect from those just the cake modernist buildings like the Sears Tower to the full-on postmodern buildings that are having fun.
You see. So walking uh, tour, as you indicated, include walking. Can you tell us the health benefit of walking?
Sure. I mean, I I come from a relatively thin family anyway.
Okay.
So who knows if I would be a relatively thin person if I if I didn't walk so much. I think I probably would though, based on my family's genetics, but
Okay.
it's absolutely good for my health. You know, walking, it gives me, you know, obviously the exercise. I think it helps with my posture. I've had strangers come up to me on the street and compliment me on my posture as I'm standing there on the street. So
That's
I think it
good.
helps with that. I'm sure it helps with circulation. I think it helps with my mental health. You know,
Mm,
if ever I'm feeling depressed or anxious, I know I can go out for a walk, whether it is in the city or in the neighborhood or in nature, right? And
yes.
just getting out to walk, getting somehow outside of myself helps me to get in the present, right? Helps to ground myself.
Okay. I make assuming also being a tour guide involve a lot of responsibilities because you are guiding people, and sometimes things may happen, and you should be trained to handle certain circumstances. So, what is the process? What do you need to do to be a tour guide? Do you need a license, or you just kind of decide to be a tour guide? Or what are the regulations the city impose on, for instance, on your organization and or on you as a tour guide?
Well, there's a difference between rules and regulations put on an individual person working for another company
Okay,
versus a person who owns a company. So
okay,
me owning my own company, it's like any kind of small business. There's tons of regulations. There's definitely tons of taxes.
okay.
There's just all kinds of paperwork.
Mm,
Um, so I have to be licensed as a city business. I have to be licensed with the state of Illinois. There's all that kind of business insurance, right? There's all that kind of stuff. But working as just a tour guide,
mm,
uh, unfortunately, there is no licensing in Chicago for that. It's not like there are certain other cities in the world where you have to be licensed to be
mm,
a tour guide. I think that on the one hand, I think Chicago should do something like that just because we do have, I think, an overabundance of people who work as tour guides who aren't giving correct information and their guests don't know that, right?
yeah,
I've also had people, especially since COVID, copy my tours
okay,
and try to offer them for sale. And it's been a real problem.
okay,
So I think that if Chicago regulated that somehow, that would be great. On the other hand, I also think that Chicago has a problem with corruption when it comes to regulating things. And
okay,
so I could see a licensing process being just another avenue for the wrong people making money off of a useless system.
okay. But you kind of share the idea that a training is a must. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, training is a must. So
Yeah.
how do you you are a business owner. You are operating in Chicago. However, you must also acknowledge there is a quite a campaign of negative views on Chicago and safety. How do you deal with those issues as a business owner living in Chicago, knowing the city, and seeing in big major company people talking about shootings and killings?
So it's a tough question to answer because I think it depends on what context we're talking about. Like, are we talking about someone on my tour who's asking, are we going to be safe walking in this area? Are we talking about someone from the news who's asking me my opinion on the general safety of Chicago neighborhoods in general? So I think I would answer that question differently based on what we're talking about. But generally speaking, excuse me, generally speaking, I think that your average visitor to Chicago has gotten a really biased and exaggeratedly negative view of Chicago in terms of crime and in terms of safety. And I tell people Chicago is like any other big city. You always want to be aware of your surroundings. Don't walk down the street with a map out like this and your wallet hanging out of your pants, right? Like be smart about it, like you would in London, like you would in Paris, like you would in Tokyo. It's a big city, right? That said, every big city is going to have its areas that are safer and its areas that are not so safe. And so if people want specific information about that, I can, give them the bit that I do understand about our city in that way, just for their own safety. Yeah.
I see. You walked in the street of Paris and you are doing it in your own city. Can you give us parallels, commonalities, and differences between walking in Paris and walking in Chicago?
So I think the first thing that comes to mind, and this might seem, excuse me, this might seem very like philosophical, but I think the commonality is just how walking in either one of those cities, you really get in touch with your humanity, right?
Okay.
You really you get a better sense of how we're all people. We all have good points and bad points. We all have needs. We all have strengths. We all have weaknesses. We all have our own subjective perspective. And I think that walking down the street in Chicago is in many ways just like walking down the street in Paris and vice versa because of that. I would also say that the look of the buildings, we have little bits and pieces of Beaux-Arts styling in Chicago, especially downtown and along the river, or on Michigan Avenue there. And so you get little hints of that in Paris because that's where the style comes from. You also have that commonality of the river running right through the city, and how you have a river walk. I mean, the quay on the Seine is a beautiful place to take a walk. And now finally, as of the last 20 years or so, the quay on the Chicago River is finally a beautiful place to walk. So I think there's a lot of commonalities.
Okay. What do you think the city need to do to improve um, walking around the city? What do you think we need to do to improve and make it better walking city?
I think probably two things. I think more signs for cardinal directions, just being able to know I'm at this intersection. Am I facing north? Am I facing east? Which way am I facing? Because even locals, you get downtown among all the buildings and people all the time come up to me and they'll be like, which way is the lake? Because that's how we orient. The lake is always east. And so then you can orient yourself. So I would say just better cardinal directions so that people who are walking around get a sense of where they're going more easily. But also public bathrooms.
Okay.
We don't have anything like that in Chicago, not like how they do in Paris. So I recently read something about I think the guy who did the bathrooms in Paris was approached to do something similar in Chicago. So I don't know if that's going to happen, but for both people who don't have homes to go and use the bathroom when they need to, and also people who are out walking around so they don't have to find some store to pop into and ask to use the bathroom.
Okay. Um, Me personally, despite the bad news, about Chicago, um, by living here for many years, end up being in love with the city because I feel like the city have the downtown area, but have its small neighborhoods.
Yes.
So, what do you teach people about the small neighborhood and the diversity in the city? And do you take them in different part of the city beside the downtown?
I do. So I explain to people, I explain this on all of my tours, especially on boat tours, because boat tours usually are people don't usually get out on foot and walk around. They just do the boat tour and then they might go to like Navy Pier, right? So I tell people, eat your way through Chicago. Chicago is a city of something like 200 neighborhoods, and I tell them the difference between community areas. A lot of people and even a lot of tour guides get confused. They say we have 77 neighborhoods, but we actually have 77 community areas that are then broken into about 200 neighborhoods. So for example, Chinatown is the name of the neighborhood, but it's within the community area called Armour Square that contains other neighborhoods, right? So I tell people Chicago, it was founded as a city of immigrants. It continues to be a city of immigrants. It is this wonderful American patchwork of cultures and languages and cuisines and histories. And so you're only getting a tiny, tiny experience of it if you just stay in the middle. You know, strike out, use the L, use your feet, do something, get out into the neighborhoods. And the best way I usually can explain it is eat your way through it. You know, eat your way through the neighborhoods.
Your way through the neighborhoods. So if there is people out there around the world who have in doubt about visiting Chicago, can you tell us why they should come and visit? And if they want to visit through your walking tour, what should they do to reach out to you and make sure that you give them the best walking tour they never experienced in their life?
So I would refer, to answer that question, I would refer to something that I have honestly been told by countless people. Because by now I've been working in tourism for 16 years. I've been operating my business for 10 or 11 years. So I've met tens of thousands of people by now. And I cannot tell you how often people say, usually if they come from outside the country, they tell me, when you come to the United States, everyone says you got to go to New York first. So we went to New York. And then we had a little time, so we went over to the West Coast. We saw LA or Las Vegas or San Francisco. And then maybe because we had a layover in Chicago for like a day, we popped into Chicago to see it a little bit. And every single person says, we really wish we would have started here because Chicago is this best kept secret. We had no idea it's so spacious, so beautiful, so clean. The people are so friendly. There's so much to do. So I would say that for anyone who's afraid of or not thinking of coming to Chicago, I would say it's kind of like going to, you know, New York is good, the West Coast is good. Every part of our country has something different to offer, but if you're skipping Chicago, you are missing the heart of the country. You really are.
To, if I can add to that, I believe the city of Chicago is the middle of America. And if America is a body, I will Chicago is the heart. And to better know a country or a person, you must know the person heart.
Yes.
Miss Hillary Marzec, thank you very much for joining me under the Human Rights Tree. But I will not end there. I will give you the opportunity to have the last word by sharing your information on how people can contact you if they want to have a tour with you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So my company is called Inside Chicago Walking Tours. The website is just the name of my business, InsideChicagoWalkingTours.com.
Okay.
And if you would want to check out the tours that we offer, any contact page on my website comes directly to me. And if you did want to reach out to me by email with any questions, it's just my name, Hillary, HILLARY, at InsideChicagoWalkingTours.com.
Again, thank you very much for joining me under the Human Rights Tree. It was a pleasure talking to you and learning about Inside Chicago Walking Tour.
Well, thank you again for having me. I was happy to talk about it.
Have a great summer season.
Thank you.
Oh, bye.
Bye-bye.